Welcome. You are listening to the Be a Better Being podcast hosted by Michelle Zellner and Sasha Berscheid. Michelle and Sasha are here to give you information and inspiration to help you live your healthiest, happiest lives. Thank you for tuning in. We hope you enjoy the show.
Greetings. Thank you for tuning in to the Be a Better Being podcast. I'm Michelle Zellner, your host, and today I'm joined with somebody who I actually don't know very well, but he put a LinkedIn post up and it just really screamed at me. And I reached out to him mainly to tell him how proud I was of that post, but also because I think he would have been an amazing guest on this show. And that is why Vinny Nuzzo is here with me today. So welcome, Vinny. How are you?
Hi, Michelle. Thank you so much. And thank you for having me and for the kind words. Like you said, the post sometimes it's difficult to be vulnerable, right? But you do it and you help some people along the way. And here I am, like brought us two together.
Yeah. And we got to have a little conversation about a month and a half ago or so, just to, kind of get to know each other and what we're going to talk about. And I know we could have many episodes just on you, but let's start out with what that post was about, and then we'll dive into some of the things that kind of brought you there and brought you to where you are now.
Yeah. So, it's really a concept that I really struggled with for a while was just being vulnerable about my past and some of the things and choices I've made. But ultimately, it boils down to not everybody that looks healthy or fit is actually healthy. And for me, it was the use of steroids in my past that really, it speaks to what people are willing to do to look fit. And they actually sacrifice health along the way. And certainly it's not steroids is the only thing. There's eating disorders and other drugs and things that people use to look a certain way that makes them, I guess, feel better, but really health is lacking. So that post was really about me opening up and jumping out there with my history and my sort of testimony around that scenario. It's been a long road for me to be actually able to speak out openly about that, because typically you hide those things from people about what you've done, especially in this industry. So I thought, how many young people, I guess not just young people, but how many people are really distracted and diverted by influencers, and that really is what I have a small voice, right, in a large arena of social media, but whoever I could reach, I want them to know that that's not the answer. That you want to do it the right way, and thankfully for my scenario, it didn't really end tragically. I had some health complications that I was able to bounce back from, but there are plenty of people where life gets a lot more worse and things get a lot more dangerous. So really just pull the curtain behind a lot of these influencers out there that are kind of leading people in the wrong direction.
Well, and I think to your point, it's like you said, it's not just steroids. It's a lot of things that we do to try to achieve a certain kind of outcome, whatever that might be, whether it's how we look or how society perceives us. And I'm going to put extreme exercise in that category as well, right? It's under the veil of being really, really healthy. And I'm not saying that people who are doing extreme types of events are not healthy, but a lot of times it is at a great expense of their actual well-being, because a human was not designed to do extreme things consistently.
Yeah, so
And
that's really where Stress Undone was sort of born out of, because what a revelation for me was the understanding that exercise is nothing more than a physical stressor that we do chronically. And if it's not calibrated right or it's not appropriate, we will end up with more harmful side effects than we do positive. And extreme exercise is, that's where I was brought up in, right? No pain, no gain. And you just go hard, you outwork the person next to you. And that's how you're going to, there's no room for rest and recovery or anything like that. But understanding that the body is a living organism and it's affected drastically by high bouts of stress, exercise being one of them. And we kind of get away with it in our youth. Our body's a little bit more resilient, we recover faster, and there's plenty of times where there's a little bit of that buffer, in our early 20s and stuff. But yeah, exercise done extremely will absolutely do more harm than it does good. And we're just told, either we believe that we just did something wrong, right? The injury is our fault, or the burnout, right? Or the allostatic overload, or wait, it's just our fault. We did something wrong. But really, the truth is, we're working this thing way too hard.
Yeah. And I want to get into what you're doing currently with Stress Undone. But before we do that, we got to go back. We got to go through like the story of Vinny, where
Yeah,
you're from, how you grew up, what got
yeah,
you into using steroids in the first
yeah,
place, and then how you got out of that. Let's
yeah.
dive into that story.
Absolutely. So I grew up in a rough neighborhood. That really was the crux of where that mentality came from, of out hustle, outwork, the next person. And really, if you want to make it, which I hate even using these terms, because that's just no indication of success. Money and things are no indication. But that's really where that was born out of. Those are deep rooted identity issues where you're growing up in poverty. And I want to be clear that that's first world poverty. I always like to say that, right? Because even poverty in America is way different than poverty in other countries. So I grew up where you had to work hard. I played football. That was where lifting really came into play because I was a small guy. I'm a twin. I have a twin brother, and he was a little huskier than me. We did everything together. So we started lifting weights early. My father is a painter, and he had a customer that was throwing out one of those old universal sparkly red bench with the weight thing, on
I
the end.
remember that very clearly.
So we had that in the basement with the old weights, the cement weights wrapped in plastic, and that's where it all started. And we really got into it, and our personality really kicked in, and that personality trait really being addiction or obsessiveness. And that's where it started. So my father is a recovered heroin addict, my grandfather gambling. So my parents always made me very aware of what was in our blood, so to speak, and even with good things and healthy things, they would just say, hey, like, they would point it out, like, do you see how you're being about that? Could you imagine if it was drugs? So they really harped on that because of my father's past. Little did I know at that time was the seed of addiction in health, and that my personality kicked in, and I went always all or nothing. I was always all or nothing. And so started weight training at 12 years old, in the basement. And it was really for power. At that point, it was for power, it was for football. And then we stopped playing football in high school. And what were we going to apply the addiction to next? And it was bodybuilding. That's what happened. So we were already in the gym, and we were big for our age, so we got a lot of attention from some of the older guys in the gym, like, man, you guys are well on your way. And that's really where then the introduction to steroids came, where I was getting into bodybuilding and I was entertaining steroids for the first time, and an older gentleman, right, who you believe is a friend, So yeah, so I did 3 cycles between the ages of 20 and 22. And to give you an idea of my obsessiveness, maybe this doesn't land. I'm not sure what your background, what your knowledge is on steroids, but I started very small with a half a cc of Deca, which is really nothing, every other week. And then I ended up doing 1,800 milligrams of testosterone a week by the time I got to my third cycle, which again, it all was inside of 18 months to 2 years. And I actually didn't compete on steroids. Once I got off my last cycle, my hormone levels shut down completely. And I went to the doctor, and she did some blood work and got me on a hormone replacement therapy, and to get me back on track, which I needed for 18 months. And I would get checked in the beginning, it was every month, then every 3 months, until I was able to just get off and never, thankfully, ever touch it again, which was a little over 15 years now. So I did compete a couple of times and I did well, and I actually wasn't on steroids at the time, So, and they do say everything which I believe that you have gained from the chemical, you lose, yeah, except for the side effects, of course. So thankfully, I've been within normal ranges ever since, and I've never needed to or wanted or had the desire to. But what I was left with and what the residual was of that is depression. So I struggle a great deal with that. And at the time, I was in my early 20s and I was an athlete when I was younger. I never touched drugs. I never did anything. But then in come the early 20s and I started smoking marijuana. So at the same time that I was sort of running through these chemical issues with steroids, I was playing around with marijuana. And then I became a heavy smoker in my early 20s to the point where I was smoking an ounce a week, which for a lot of people, that's a lot. That's a great deal, So I really lost the ability to cope. It wasn't, it started recreational, right? But then it wasn't that. It was when I was sad, when I was happy, when I was angry, it just became literally the thing that, kept me going. And so it brought about those two things really did a number on me. And I didn't realize it so much until the pandemic because I brought my addiction from one thing to the next and I became a workaholic. I got married at 26 and I had two boys. I have two boys, 8 and 6 years old. And I really just, again, coming from poverty, when I met my wife in church actually. And once I realized I wanted to propose, I was like, I have no money, you know? So from that moment on, I just started working like a maniac. And thankfully, we bought our first home right away and then our second a few years after. And I really just went from one thing to the next. I excelled in the corporate world and in fitness and corporate fitness. And then the pandemic hit. And I was, for the first time in a long time, with myself, and realizing a lot of the damage, I guess, that was done from the prior lifestyle. And being a workaholic brought about a lot of guilt for me because I didn't spend a lot of time at home, and I grew up, like I said, in poverty where I used to pray. I used to pray for poverty because I knew how much closeness it brought to a family. So here I am now I never aspired to be anything. It's not like I grew up and I was like, I want to be a basketball player or I want to be a police officer. I just wanted to be a husband and a father. I didn't care how I provided. I wanted to do something with people. Fitness just happened to be an area that I excelled at, in college and stuff. So and here I was, a husband and a father, never home with my wife and children. And that brought about a lot of problems, right? Family problems, marital problems. And the pandemic hit, and that was a major, major reset for me, like a lot of people, A
Yeah.
couple of months prior to the pandemic, the shutdown, my aunt passed away from pancreatic cancer. So at 61, which is very aggressive cancer. And my uncle just retired from the police force and they're like getting ready to enjoy their golden years. And to me, it was just like, whoa, like how many people does this happen to where you sacrifice 40 years to maybe enjoy 10 or 20 and your health is shattered, So I had the opportunity. It was very difficult, but a lot of conversations with my wife and just readjusting the dream and the plan and just saying, is this really what we want? At any moment, you get one phone call, one diagnosis, and your whole life is flipped upside down. So I said, if I have to work like crazy when my children are in college, then fine. But these years, I want to enjoy the journey. I want to enjoy the ride and I want to be around,
Well, I mean, I think you made a great choice. I'm
Yes.
guessing you and your wife and your kids probably think that as
Yes.
well. Before
Yeah,
we
no
really
regrets.
dive into what that reset looked like,
Yeah,
let's go back to college, being a twin, your family dynamics. Like,
sure.
Was depression something you probably always struggled with, but really didn't know it until later? Talk a little bit about that because I think, especially for men,
Yeah.
young men, right? This
Yeah.
is something we're getting better about talking about,
Yeah.
but we still need to talk more about it. And to hear it come from somebody who is open to sharing that, I think is really powerful message.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I didn't really realize depression. The first time I really became aware and questioned it for the first time, I was probably around 18 or 19 when the winters would hit and I would really lose ambition and energy and just feel like not doing anything. So that was the first time that I kind of was like, I guess I have seasonal affective, depression or disorder. I would just call it disorder. I would never use the word, depression. I grew up, a traditional Italian New York family where
Yes.
men really didn't. But thankfully, my father was not like that. His father was like that. Very aggressive is the wrong word. A tyrant and abusive is what my grandfather was and is. So they didn't have a relationship actually for over a decade. They didn't speak when I was a young boy. So my father went the other way. So he broke cycles, absolutely. And I grew up with a lot of love and affection. I still hug and kiss my father to this day. Always a lot of love and affection. He went the opposite direction. But my father, because you got
I'm guessing maybe your father started to turn to drugs, maybe in part because of that lack of affection.
oh, not in part. 100%. My grandfather was emotionally, verbally, physically abusive to where almost like brain damage abusive, physical abuse with my father. My father has three sisters, no brothers. So who got the beatings? It was my father and my grandmother. Those two really got the beatings. And it was really because my grandfather had to work four jobs. He's an Italian immigrant. And the reason why he had to work four jobs is because he had a gambling problem. So he resented his family, but really he was his own problem. And, so that is really where my father was out on the streets, homeless pretty much at 14 years old, living in park benches or trying to sleep in the back seat of somebody's car if the door was unlocked back in those days, and then get out before the sun came up. So yeah, he ended up getting wrapped up very, very early with heavy drugs. And if you know anything about the onset of drug use and abuse, you pretty much stop developing emotionally. So my father then, he finally cleaned himself up later, not until I was a baby. So I was born in Arizona, actually, in Scottsdale. They grew up in New York, but when my mother was pregnant with me and my twin, they moved to Arizona to get my father away from his surroundings. But that don't matter. You find it, you have to change. So very quickly he got mixed up with the Mexican mafia over there and got his hands on heroin very quickly. So they split up actually when I was born because my mother was like, no way, like kids are born, this is it. So my father actually came back to New York to start his own life, but it haunted him because he used to, when he was in the streets really struggling with drugs, he would just pray to have one son that he could treat better than his father treated him. And he felt like I could kick these drugs. And he got three sons. So he cleaned himself up in a rehab here in New York and then went back to Arizona. They got back together. We moved back to New York and then they got married when I was about 4 or 5 years old. So I grew up where my dad, from that point, he became a workaholic, right? You have to do something, you have to stay busy. And so thankfully, because we were poor. I was on welfare till I was 10 years old, standing on line at church for the box of cheese and clothes. So my father would work from morning till night and I didn't realize my father's, how could you? You're a child, right? But I didn't realize my father's inability and struggles emotionally, like that emotional damage, until I became a man where I could see he's really stopped developing emotionally and he struggles big time with insecurities and just feeling love. And it's very, very deep. And because he's never sought therapy. He just, or anything like that. He still today, to this day, struggles greatly with those kinds of things. And I know that a lot of the behaviors and words and things that he would say then, they were affecting me. I just didn't realize it. You really don't realize how much of your parents are in you, until you get older, you have your own family, your own child. And then if you're aware enough, you will absolutely pick up on how much you are like them. And I know that my father is absolutely depressed. He struggles with anxiety. So that's, for me growing up, they did such a good job at hiding the struggle and the trauma. They did such a good job. They're just trying to make it through the next day. It was really like, can we just make it through the next day? And I didn't realize, we're just having fun. And for me, I did well at a lot of things without trying too hard. And I think it was a blessing, and later it became a curse because I didn't realize how much I needed to do well to feel well, but I excelled in school. I excelled as a football player. Being a twin, I got a lot of attention from the ladies growing up, and blonde hair, blue eyes, and so that became. I got lost in that. How self-centered are we as a teenager? That really carried with me into my early 20s. It became such a major part of my identity. The accolades and the acknowledgement, that really was who I was and how I got by without feeling depressed, because there weren't too many depressing things happening. My younger brother, he grew up very much in our shadow, and I didn't realize that until we got older. So when he was younger, he went through these different identity transitions, whether it was with music or where he was really just trying to find himself, in different ways. And I didn't realize the beacon of courage that he would be for me as I got older, because he went ahead of us in emotional development. Absolutely. So he became such an inspiration for me going through some of the things. Not that he knows that necessarily, right?
Well, he
But
does now.
he will, right? Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely.
I want to touch on, the accolades and how that carried you through. Just for anybody listening to understand that whenever we have a void in our life and then something seems to fill that void, that is what we're going to gravitate to. Your dad broke that generational cycle of abuse, which is amazing. But because he didn't have the tools himself to be able to understand emotions and go through his own healing process, he
Yeah.
can't then express love. And you now, because we're in a very different time of life and, different things that we have available, and because you are clearly a very evolved human who's willing to do some hard work and be
Sure.
reflective, now you get to continue that cycle in a way different way where now you can show your kids love. And I think it's a really kind of beautiful journey. I mean, it started from something incredibly tragic. And I'm going to
Yeah.
say your grandfather, right? Why is he in such distress? Well, clearly
Yeah.
there were things in his life.
Absolutely.
Right. So this is all these generational things. And the way it stops is because somebody decides to do some really, really, really hard work.
That's it.
And
That's really what it comes down to.
as much of the hard work as they are capable of, as they have the desire to do, as they have the tools and resources and support to do. And then it's up to the next generation to continue that hard work so that it just continues to get better and better.
And that's I guess, where I sort of grabbed the baton, from my dad, because, to be honest, I don't know that I could have done what he did if I was in his same situation, where there is no support. He did, like, I have him for a dad, which is awesome. I didn't have his dad for a dad, you know what I mean? So I don't know that I would have been able to do what he did, but whatever was in his ability, whatever he could muster up, and I don't have to struggle with poverty the way he did, and the way they did. I only played around or got mixed up with marijuana and not other things that affected, and I didn't deal or get involved with marijuana until I was 21. He was doing hard drugs as a teenager.
Right.
So, I can't, it's just a tremendous feat for him. But that's really where I picked up the baton to say, like you said, hard work needs to be done and there was a void. It's just that I never knew there was a void
Right.
because so much was going my way. So many things were going my way. Not that I didn't have some small bouts or seasons of struggle, but there are some people, this is why we have to live with compassion, where they go years or decades without getting a break in life, where nothing goes their way. And you wonder how somebody at the age of 22, I look at what happened in Colorado at the club, the nightclub, the gay bar. I think, man, how does a 22-year-old feel so hopeless, whether they're filled with hate or whatever it is? But how do you definitely don't value your life, where at the age of 22, this is the thing that you're entertaining and that you're doing. And then my mind, like you said, and you go to compassion for my grandfather. It's a little more difficult for me to have, but I do. At the end of the day, there's people in the world who never experience love, affection, or get a break, So for me, those accolades and those accomplishments carried me and sort of created that buffer. And I was enjoying life in all the ways that I shouldn't, you know what I mean? In those days and at those ages, and doing well in work, and that identity was constant, trophy, or, winning a trip or a vacation or getting recognition. The second you walk into a gym, there's thousands of people coming in and out a day. And it's like, oh, that's, Vinny, he's, the best trainer. He's the number one trainer. And, so it was literally nonstop, dopamine from people, dopamine releases. And then the pandemic hit, right? And like I said, and all of that stopped. And the places the places that really mattered, my wife and my children, what kind of work did I do to get or deserve any type of acknowledgement and accolades? Thank God my wife is the woman she is, and thank God children are very resilient. But that for me was huge. And like you said, for young men going through these things, it's hard, depending, I guess, on how you grew up. But for me, and I'm sure a lot of young men can relate, when you become a husband and a father, the burden to provide and protect is crushing. It's so crushing. You just feel, and now I was in this place where, you want the best for your kids. You want to give them a life better than you had, and all these things that sometimes we're just programmed. And you read all these stories. Look at Steve Jobs on his deathbed. Look at all of these people. Every single one leaves the earth with a warning. Don't do what I did, every single one leaves it. And I said, man, like, it is very difficult to go against the tide. It is very difficult to say, I'm not going to chase the dollar, and give up on the accolades. And it is very, very difficult to make those decisions. And I was always a person who had some foresight, thankfully. And I just could see the amount of regret that I would have. I'll tell you, when my oldest son was 3, we had bought our second home. My youngest son was a baby. I came home from work at 8:00, and I was just in time to tuck him in. And my oldest son is very cerebral. He's very intelligent. He's very inquisitive. And he just says, hey, Daddy, you forgot to play with me. And I was like, no, I didn't forget. I was working. I just got home. And then he says this. He says, well, how you ever going to play with me if you're always at work? And I was just like, oh my gosh. Like, I just wanted to melt into the floor. And from that moment, I was like, man, like, I need to stop. I need to slow down. There's so much pressure from work. There's so much pressure from clients to continue to, right now you built this client base. I'm working 14 clients a day, 6 days a week. They depending on you, they're relying on you. Their life is, impacted. Thankfully, my wife is she's a big believer in the work I do. And she's like, you gotta keep going. You've been working so hard. And then I was in a car accident, coming home late from work, and I was falling asleep behind the wheel. And then there was another warning where I was like, man, I really have to stop working so much. And I pushed one more year, and then the pandemic hit. So I feel like it was such a blessing in disguise, but it is very difficult. I don't know. I'd like to give myself the credit to say that even if the pandemic hit, I would have made the choice. But I don't know that I would have been able to see the cost. Being home during the pandemic, I could see the cost of being absent from the home. I could see the benefit of being present in the home. And I could see how my boys needed me. And really, my boys, they're tremendous. They are very, very well behaved. They're the sweetest things. They're still boys. They'll give my wife a hard time sometimes. So I became just this voice of reprimand. Whenever daddy was around, he was just telling you, no, stop it. Why are you giving mommy a hard time? You got to, because I'm working so much. Your patients are down to nothing. You got nothing left, especially doing the work where, like we do one-on-one, you're engaged with person after person. There's a fresh set of eyes on you every hour, on the hour. And I had a 90-minute commute each way, so I'm exhausted, and all I could do is just say, stop what you're doing. That's all I had the energy for. And I thought they need to see more of me other than this person who's trying to, get them in line all the time. I have so much more to give them, and then it was really all those things start setting in, right? Like, what good is it if I can leave them a little bit of money? First of all, most people work their lives. They don't have too much money to give their kids anyways, right? And then if I could give them that, but they don't have what's in here and in here, what good is it, So for me growing up, thankfully, I painted a lot with my father as a kid. At 10 years old, summers and weekends, I worked, so we would be in a room for 6, 8 hours, and we would talk about life and love and relationships, and that was our bonding time. For me, I don't have that with my boys. I would tuck them in Sunday night, and I wouldn't see them again till Saturday afternoon. I was just like, this is not sustainable. It's not good. It's not healthy, and none of it is worth it. So for me, the pandemic really allowed me to see and really take in the cost of being absent.
Well, and I would say too, the other thing that you were modeling for your boys is that this is what men do. They are absent from the home.
Right?
I mean, you were working, but still absent from the home.
Yep.
And, and clearly we should all do the best we can to strive to provide for our families what we need.
That's right.
I'm not going to sit here and say, everybody quit your job and just stay home.
Right.
The government will take care of you.
Yeah.
Nonprofits will take care. No. Your job as a contributing member of society
That's right.
is to strive to be able to provide your family that you have what it needs. And then it's about determining, okay, how much more am I willing to sacrifice to get what? And that is where the hard choice comes to be made. And I don't know what your other version of you would have done had there not been a pandemic, but I know with all the people I work with, because they hit pandemic well beyond the age that you did, you probably would have just kept going.
You don't see an end in sight, especially in certain industries and in certain, just take corporate as a whole, where you are working hard to climb the ladder and earn your stripes. And, there's like 5 really good positions out of the thousands of the workers, So yeah, I don't see how there would have been a way out that was just a perfect exit, Yeah. And it's difficult for young men. I don't know. And you see the change. I'm sure, look, people, that are 20, 30 years my senior, they're like, okay, I'm done. How does a young person reprioritize, and it just comes back to really, and I'll say it over and over again, is it's so advantageous to be able to disconnect from the world. If you cannot pluck yourself out of the rat race and all the pressures there, you lose yourself. And I had to go back to being young and just really like, what is it that I want? And just time, and just seeing that your time here is limited. And look, nothing's promised that you're going to live to the average age of 78, right? That's what my aunt taught me. And not only that, growing up in a rough neighborhood, I had a lot of friends that were dead young, from drug overdoses and drunk driving, car accidents. And there's nothing saying that you have any time promised. So, and then I think I'm 37, I'm going to be 38 soon. Then I'm like, okay, I'm about halfway there. How fast did this half go? The next half's going to go a lot faster.
It does.
So
Wild,
it's
but it
it
does.
is difficult for young people, not just young men, to say, what do I want, and how bad do I want it? What am I willing to give up for it? I think there is wisdom in trying to be efficient with your time early on and do a couple of the right things. Thankfully, right? I made a couple of the right investments, a couple bad ones also, but and do the best you can to try to get a leg up, especially if your situation is difficult. And then I think as soon as possible, rebalance out your life as soon as possible, because if it doesn't cost you, let's say you don't have a family, right? Maybe you're not married with children. It will cost you in your health. It will absolutely at some point cost you in your health. And so many times people, they have a lot of, most of my clientele is between 55 and 85, where they did all that, their work, and now they're suffering, and they really just wish, man, I wish I could just get my life back and get my movement back and get my youth back. And sometimes it goes too far, and there's just nothing you could do about it.
Yeah, and it goes right to my motto: hard now or harder later.
That's right. And hard now is always better. Hard now, I say, right now at this moment, you are both the oldest you've ever been and the youngest you'll ever be.
That is
So
right.
so right now, I experienced a ton of injuries in my early 20s. Part of the steroid abuse, it weakens joints, and I was training like a maniac. And there was a period of time between 24 and 26, right after I had come off the steroids, a year or two after being off the steroids at 22. uh, I every 3 to 6 months I was either on crutches or in a sling, and it really hit me like, how, number one, how am I going to keep doing this as a hobby and a profession? And number two, thankfully, that happened in my 20s, because most of the time people experience that when they're older, their body's not as resilient, and it's so much more difficult. You hear it all the time. They have a slip and fall, and that's it. It was downhill for that person ever since then. They broke a hip, whatever it is. And so for me, I was so grateful. It was very humbling, right? Because at that age, all I wanted to do was be on top of the world and feel invincible. I was so grateful to say, man, these injuries happen now, and it's given me the opportunity to reassess I was just thinking, here's what we're taught, right? Just go and do something. Just go and do exercise, right? And I was really sitting there evaluating, like, isn't exercise supposed to be good for you? Why am I falling apart? Like, what's happening? And obviously there was a misinterpretation on my end in what exercise is and could do for you. And most of the time, we just traditionally, we didn't care, and we just kept going, and it was, but no, these aren't just regular bumps and bruises. These are major injuries that'll change your entire life.
Yeah, it's one of the reasons I will often encourage the younger generations, what I call the YBI, the young, beautiful, and invincible, to realize that just because you don't feel like you're causing yourself harm doesn't mean you're not causing yourself harm. It's going to show up at some point, but that is a really hard concept to wrap your head around. Really,
You
really
know,
hard.
I've spoken to thousands of clients, And every time I get in front of a young person, the only advantage, if I could speak to a peer, is just say, hey, I I went through it already. You didn't get injured yet, but I promise it's not going to be the barbell that breaks. It's going to be your knee or your back.
Right, right. So let's transition into this new thing that you're doing with Stress Undone, because I want to touch on that and get into what you're doing and how you can help people undo the damage that has been done. And that's the good news, right? We're humans, we're very
Yes.
resilient, but you
Yes.
first have to stop causing harm. That's number one.
Yeah, and that's a good analogy. It's a good point. What I tell people is if you're being burned by something, you can't begin to heal that skin and until you remove the heat source, right? It just makes sense. But like you said, especially with the younger people, it's very difficult to slow down and fully understand that sometimes less is more, and you have to play the long game. And often, very few people learn the easy way. Most of us learn the hard way. Look, and I'm no different. I learned the hard way through and through,
Yep.
hard-nosed injury. It wasn't the first injury that I learned. It was like the sixth one or seventh one where I was like, whoa. The first time I was actually entertaining surgery is when I was like, oh my gosh, like it was my rotator cuff. I had a 40% labral tear and 20% rotator cuff. And I couldn't wash my hair. And then I realized, how strong are you? I had all these muscles, but I couldn't raise a brush or my hand. So it really is, the sooner the better. That's what I tell people. Like, I would just say, the sooner you could begin to adopt this preservation mindset, the better off you're going to be. And because the truth is, you can have all these gains until you reach this peak in your life, your 20s. After a certain point, it's just all about slowing down the rate of decay. So that means you need to recalibrate everything of what you're doing. So that's why a lot of my clientele was older, because they had the ear to hear me. They were like, "Oh, you're saying exactly what I need to hear," because they need exercise, they want exercise, but exercise in and of itself is a threat. And that's where I would come in. And the niche that I was really in is somebody who had trauma, physical therapy that failed them, or it's over and now what? Or they went down the rabbit hole of pain medicine and surgery after surgery, not one knee surgery, but 5 knee surgeries, right? And they're like, what do I do now? Like, what's happening? And they're getting really desperate. And that's unfortunately where a lot of people need to be. They need to be humbled, and nothing humbles you more than an injury, right? A serious injury,
Yeah.
in order to be able to be receptive to the kind of work that I do.
Yeah. So we're out of pandemic. Are you working with people in person? Are you doing virtual? Do you also do any kind of coaching? Because we know not everything is corrected through different kinds of movement. A lot of it is attitude and mindset coaching, and it's nutrition, and it's stress management, right? It's all of those things. So before we officially wrap up, tell a little bit
Yeah.
about exactly how you work with people.
Yeah. So I never really thought of myself as a mindset coach. It was you are every single coach, every single good coach, and every single good trainer is absolutely that. They have to embody that as well. But really, it started with mitigating structural stress, where I dealt with trauma, spinal stenosis, C-sections, joint replacement, scar tissue. For instance, I have a lot of clients where if they had open heart surgery and now the surgery went well and they need to do cardio homework from their cardiologist, but they have a bum knee. And that's a great picture of what a lot of people will be like, because if you have structural injuries, you can't fight for your life as you get older. You can't fight to diabetes. You can't fight to lose weight if you have joint issues. So that's really where it all began. And then when I began to see that there are other sources of stress, that it's not just structural stress, but nutritional stress and psychological stress, where we are as a human species, no one lives in stress like we do. No species lives in stress like we do. But like other species, we weren't made to. We were made to uh, capitalize on short bouts of acute stress, not live in chronic stress. And that's where some of the mindset coaching comes in, as far as you have to reevaluate the things that you allow yourself to get stressed about. And that's where some of the emotional work comes from. But really, I address three pillars of stress, which is nutritional stress, psychological, and structural. And I'm doing that one-on-one and virtual. And I'm working on building a program to where people could just have access to that all the time and go through the course on their own. But it's about mitigating chronic inflammation. And the only way you do that is addressing chronic stress. And those are the three pillars that I've found most stress falls under, So, and at the cellular level, the body doesn't know the difference. Stress is just stress. It's either aiding development or it's deconstructing. It's tearing the body down. So it's about optimizing those things and really taking a look, using data, right, and using whatever fit technology you can. HRV is a huge thing. It's our North Star, heart rate variance, as far as knowing whether or not to train hard that day. And if you can just begin to say, what days can I train hard and what should I be doing on those days? And the days that I can't train hard, we say, when you can't work out, work in, and that's when you're doing things that are regenerative and restorative in nature, and rebuilding, filling up the gas tank. And it's more than just HRV, because you can have a great HRV but have a knee injury. So that the things that prevent you from training hard that day are HRV being off, a structural issue, or acute digestive issue. And those are the things that you're going to say, okay, I'm going to work in this day. And that's what's going to give you longevity. That's going to, in the long run, right? Inflammation didn't come overnight, and it's not going to go away overnight, but that's when you're beginning to establish health and set yourself up for success, because a lot of people try to get fit on top of unhealthy circumstances.
Yep.
And they put the cart before the horse, and it never ends up well.
Yep. Well, Vinny, I feel like we could go on talking for hours about this. You are fascinating. You are a wealth of information. I love your approach. If you can't work out, work in. That is a soundbite right there. I love it. Thank you. How can people find you? We'll put all of this in the show notes, but give a little shout out here now.
Yeah, absolutely. So the website is stressundone.com. I've been writing a blog now. I started writing a blog, right? Reading is something that I've always been an advocate of. Never writing, but reading is a major part of being a good writer. So I'm stepping into that. And of course, on Instagram at Mrs. Stress Undone, and on LinkedIn at just linkedin.com/Vinny Nuzzo. And those are the two platforms that I'm most active on at the moment.
I love it. And your content is great. So I encourage everybody to follow it. This has been a really great conversation. I really appreciate you coming on. And I have a feeling we're going to have you back, because there's so much more to explore with you.
I'm excited. It's been really great. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Everybody, I mean, this was a lot, and it kind of covered a lot of different topics. I bet there's something that Vinny said that is sparking your interest, or it's making you take a pause, which is good. Whichever it is, you know that you get to take it and go and be a better being.
Thank you for listening to the Be a Better Being podcast. Michelle and Sasha hope that what you heard today inspires you to embrace this journey of life with an open mind, a kind heart, and a willingness to learn and evolve. If you enjoyed the content, please help spread their message by subscribing, sharing, and leaving a 5-star review. If you have a show topic idea or would like to be a guest, please visit betterbeings.net and fill out a contact form. Until next time, go and be a better being.